I don't know how to describe it, but the impact of working hard, like he worked for what he has gotten to. And I think that's a positive example in of itself too, for the people coming behind him to see, okay, this person paved the way, opened doors, was the first for a lot of things. Regardless of whether you agree with the content, you can still see that that paved the way and created access for, you know, other people. Because when people weren't hiring black actors, Tyler Perry was. Some actors, when I still see them, I'm like, oh, I remember them in a Tyler Perry movie. Like that's where they got their start.
Yeah, Shamar Moore and Braids. I'm all
I couldn't think of his name. I saw him on the bus in my mind. I could not think of. 4 Degrees to the Streets is designed to empower anyone curious about places and spaces, not just persons with professional degrees or backgrounds. Here we will cover a host of topics, including transportation, health, housing, and the environment through the lens of racism, classism, and sexism, and give listeners the tools they need to overcome institutional barriers. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at the 4 Degrees Pod, and tune in every other Tuesday where Nimo and Jas keep it 4 degrees to the streets.
Hey y'all. Welcome to the 4 Degrees to the Streets podcast. We are officially at the end of season 4. I'm gonna put a little silence here because I could drop some bombs. Pew, 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 pew. This is the last episode of the season. This season ended up being 11 episodes because we had a great kind of preseason episode with Veronica Davis talking about her book, Inclusive Transportation, in September. And so that was a little earlier than our normal season start of November. So after this episode, we'll be taking a break until November-ish of 2024. But you can keep active on our social media page, and we'll have content throughout the summer to keep you guys engaged and go back and stream those episodes. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about Tyler Perry and the Tyler Perry Studios down in Atlanta, Georgia. But before we get into that, Nimo, how are you doing? What's going on?
Hey, I'm doing well. Yes, I encourage everyone to listen to our episodes. There is something for everybody, and that is what we love to do. So, spring has sprung ish. It's been a little cold in DC this week, but I'm feeling good about Q2. Feeling excited. And yeah, I'm excited for what the rest of the year has in store. This season, I feel like this season actually went by kind of long for some reason. Jasmine and I were doing a lot, personal life on the show. So I feel like other seasons went by a lot faster, but we are thankful and grateful for you all. How are you doing?
Truly a labor of love. We're probably gonna do like a recap thing because this season was probably like it feels like a lot because I think it was our growth, like those growing pains type of thing. But I'm doing well. I cannot complain. There was an earthquake. We're recording this day, a day after the earthquake in New Jersey, New York. You didn't know, Nemo?
Oh no, I knew.
Oh,
Did your people feel it? Did they know
oh
what
yeah.
happened?
So I'm in like a bunch of group chats with people from New Jersey, my family and my friends. And it happened early. I think it was probably like 11 East Coast times. I think I might have still been in bed. Um, and they were like, it was an earthquake. So I called my grandpa and I was like, hey, I heard the world was shaking over there. He said, yeah, y'all brought that California stuff over here.
No, he didn't.
He did. He said that he was in the bed and that the room in the house was shaking. And I've seen people have like the ring lights inside their house, like for security and stuff. And a lot of the news outlets like got access to those videos. And like it was a real earthquake. Like stuff was shaking, stuff was falling over. It was severe. Then they had an aftershock.
Oh wow, I did. Yeah, no, I heard about it. Some people said they heard it or they felt it even down here. I did not, or I wasn't paying attention and didn't notice it. Um, Wow, because I feel like I hear everything that happens on the street anyway. Like, someone's playing their music too loud, I can hear my house shaking. So I wasn't like, I was like, okay. But I'm glad they're okay. That, as you know, growing up in the Pacific Northwest and experiencing the squally quake and seeing the ground split, they are very serious. But yes, on the topic of Tyler Perry, I feel like Jasmine and I probably bonded over some Tyler Perry movies before we knew we would do a podcast. So it's funny that we get to do this episode today. But Jasmine, what is your, yes, disclaimer, we know Tyler Perry can be controversial. This episode is not necessarily about Tyler Perry himself as the man, but his impact of his studio in Atlanta and what that means for the built natural, and social environments down there. But what is your favorite Tyler Perry movie or play, and like a scene that lives in your head rent free?
Okay, so I grew up, yes, Tyler Perry, the person, just like all of us are human and has flaws and errors and is, not a perfect man. But I grew up watching the plays on DVD on my little I had a combined DVD VHS player on top of underneath my TV with the back on it. And my favorite play is Medea Goes to Jail. The movie is good, but the play is hilarious. And I also love a good musical. So they always got some singing and it's always a gospel song. But my favorite Medea scene is I'm gonna reenact it. I'm gonna do my best to reenact it. So she's the reason why she's in jail is because what did she do? I think she skipped out on the gas. She didn't pay she didn't pay for her gas. And so she was like, I had to get to DeKalb County where I knew somebody.
Ah, why do I know that exact scene?
She said, I hit I-20 doing 110. I had to get to DeKalb County where I knew somebody. That has me, every time I watch it, I fall out. I've actually gotten, this is bad, but I've actually like used 2 different emails to get like a free 30-day subscription to BT Plus so that I could watch Tyler Perry's plays on BT Plus. And then I just
That
canceled it.
I love that. And man, Medea Goes to Jail, the play is a good one. I always think about what was her friend's name? I'm forgetting her friend's name in the play. But I remember when she came in
Oh.
the house singing Clean Up Woman. My favorite play is probably, and it's hard, but it's probably Class Reunion. Um, and when they're just literally in that one view of the hotel upstairs and downstairs, um, when Tyler Perry is acting as the bell bondsman, he's like, you gotta watch. But also I mean, this is a popular one, but when she's sitting in the room and Cora was saying something, I think, and then, or not Cora, but whoever the character was that she was trying to help and guide to a better path. And at one point, she just knocks everything over in the middle of the room. But yeah, I could watch those. It's probably been a while. I understand why you got the BET Plus subscription, because I feel like I need a recap and get some messages that I may not have understood when I was younger.
I wish I was a little bit older so I could have seen them live. That would have been a time for sure. But like Nimo mentioned, we're going to be talking about Tyler Perry Studios. And for those who may not be aware, we're going to enlighten you. But in 2015, around 2015, Tyler Perry purchased Fort McPherson, which is a military base in Southwest Atlanta, in the city, in Atlanta proper, for about $30 million. He purchased the land from the city of Atlanta, or from the state of Georgia, who purchased the land from the United States Department of Defense. And we'll get into some of the details of the transaction. But Fort McPherson is about a 500 acre, I think it's exactly like 485 acre of land. That was used by the United States military as a base. It was active from about the late 1800s, or the late 1700s. And it was initially started by the Confederate Army in the US American Civil War. And so it was used by Confederate soldiers until the Battle of Atlanta, when the Union took over the state of Georgia from the Confederacy. At some point in 2005, I think, the United States Department of Defense acknowledged that they were going to close a bunch of different naval, military, and Air Force bases across the United States. And Fort McPherson was one of the ones that were selected to be closed. They gave the city of Atlanta, the state of Georgia, a good time period to figure out what they wanted to do with the site and acquisition, but they basically were leaving this site, nearly 500 acres, open for purchase. And so why do we care? Why are we having this episode? We're having this episode because in urban areas, especially ones that are rapidly growing like Atlanta, an opportunity to develop 10 acres of land is rare. But an opportunity to develop nearly 500 acres of land is a once in a lifetime opportunity, if not a miracle, right? So when you're thinking about real estate and development in the urban areas, everything's built. Like, it's rare that you get an opportunity to really transform a whole neighborhood because you have just 500 acres of basically vacant land. There were some military buildings on site, but it wasn't built. There's a lot of it that was, I think like a half of it was just open. And so where do you have opportunity to redevelop 500 acres of basically vacant land in a city? And so it's important to look at this site because planning decisions shape a community's future in all aspects. And so when there's an opportunity to plan for an area that's this large, it's worth exploring.
And before we started recording, we were talking about like, what we learned of long range planning and a lot of plans being so far into the future. And it seems with this, and I didn't read the report, but the base realignment, what was it called? The base realignment and closure, or the BRAC, that act that closed all of the, or closed a lot of military bases across the country. I'm sure there was that planning of maybe what the future sites would be, or perhaps every locality did it different. But I feel like for other planning sites and how we've seen them developed, if where there is open land, or land that's kind of a blank slate, it takes a lot. It's a lot more thought that goes into it. But it seems like a lot of these military bases were like quick turnarounds, likely because of like, oh my God, this huge industry and job base is leaving. We need to think quickly about what we're going to do. And Jasmine, you had looked into some of the plans of what was going to be there before it is now, before it became, known that it was going to be Tyler Perry Studios.
You talked about BRAC, which is the Base Realignment and Closure Commission. It's an arm of the Department of Defense. And basically, it's both a commission and a law that decides which bases and campuses the Department of Defense wants to close. And they present the land to the state where it's located to purchase. Now it's open for purchase. They always give the state and the city where it's located like the first option to purchase it, but a private interest could come in and purchase it directly from the Department of Defense. And so at Fort McPherson, just a high overview of like the transaction, the state of Georgia created the McPherson Development Authority, which we can talk about that on a future episode, but states have the opportunity to create these like redevelopment agencies or redevelopment authorities that govern the actions of really large parcels because they're such big planning decisions. And basically that authority purchased the military base from the Department of Defense for 26 million. And then they sold 70% of it, so 330 acres of the full 485 acres, to Tyler Perry Studios for $30 million. And so on paper, that might look like a $4 million profit to the state of Georgia and city of Atlanta, but it's really not that simple. So the timeline, like I mentioned, in 2005, the Army acknowledged they were going to close Fort McPherson along with other military bases, including Fort Monmouth in New Jersey, which we'll talk about, but that's going plans for that to be the future home of Netflix in New Jersey. And then from 2007 to 2012, which is what Nimo alluded to, the community began making plans. That Fort McPherson Development Authority started thinking, oh my God, we're going to have 500 acres. What can we do for it? Those plans called for the redevelopment that included housing, employment, employment centers, and retail centers. So the site, Fort McPherson, is anchored by two different MARTA stations. So at the top of the 500 acres is a MARTA station, and at the MARTA is Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority. It's their train line. It has two MARTA stations anchored by it. It's also at the intersection of Campbellton Road and Lee Street in Atlanta, which are two major thoroughfares for the city of Atlanta, and particularly this neighborhood, Southwest Atlanta. So they had all these plans that included just like they wanted to make like a new urbanist type of community there, housing, stores, green space. And then in 2014, Tyler Perry conversations emerged. And then in 2015, all the redevelopment plans include Tyler Perry taking a third of the land and the city of Atlanta retaining about 100, 150 acres of the land to do any type of redevelopment. And then in 2019, Tyler Perry opened up his studios to the world. And so it's been like a 20-year timeline, but you can see the difference. And I'll talk about some of the plans.
Yeah, because it seems like between 2012, which is when, Tyler Perry wasn't in the picture, and then 2019, him opening his studios, planning updates don't even have, some of them don't even happen in that short amount of time. So I can see how, the thought or the feeling may be, oh wow, this person had the resources, and so that made all of the other plans go out the window, um, because of name his significance as in Hollywood, and Atlanta being the Hollywood of the South now, and his influence with that. Even before this studio, he had other smaller studios in the Atlanta area, and has set that as a base for a lot of his movies and TV shows too. And so it was like a brewing thing that just exploded with this studio in 2019.
Yeah, and there were something like over that period from 2007 to 2012, there were something like 8 or 9 plans um done by different organizations and community groups to plan for that site because it's I mean it's like I said, it's a huge opportunity. And so those plans basically all, I'm not going to go through each of the plans, but they basically all called for an urban mixed use site. They wanted single family homes, townhomes, apartments. Think about housing density at every single scale. They wanted a retail corridor along both Campbellton Road and Lee Street. The Veterans Administration Hospital was still on that site, and so they built around they planned for like seniors and supportive housing around the VA hospital. And then it also called for a bunch of office and like supportive to Tyler Perry. Well, at the time Tyler Perry wasn't there, but they called for um office buildings and different things like that. And so that was not realized. Instead, they got Tyler Perry Studios on 300 or so acres of the land, and now the city of Atlanta currently has 150 acres of that land in their ownership to figure out what they're going to do with it starting today.
And as part of that, I think I saw um was that he's planning an expansion also.
Yeah, and we can get into it what the site's going to be in the future because the city of Atlanta is looking for someone. Cities don't like to build their own things. Like they don't want to be developers, and so their city of Atlanta is looking for and is offering ground leases to developers to build on the site. And so we can talk about some of the people that have been interested, and Tyler Perry is one of them, and seeing what he can do to have more of like a front facing, because TPS is close to the public, like it's a
Yeah.
private studio. So what he can do to have more of like a front facing, more public version.
So to give an example of other Department of Defense sites, former military bases, as Jasmine mentioned, there were a lot of plans to create a new urbanist multi-use development site. So I'll give an example of one site that's been around for a little while, that's been redeveloped now for, I want to do the math in my head, like maybe 15 years. And then, about 15 years in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And then also talk a little bit about the site in Fort Monmouth, in Asbury Park in New Jersey. Did I say that right? Is it Asbury Park?
Yes, Asbury
I
Park.
know I had to remember my my Jersey nomenclature.
Jersey.
One that has been around, Myrtle Beach Air Force Base. So that closed in 1993. And as Jasmine mentioned, they had a redevelopment authority that was created the following year. And so that former base was about 4,000 acres. So significantly bigger than Tyler Perry Studios. I mean, you said it was 500 acres. Uh, with that and the significance, there was a lot of that fear. Residents feared that the impacts would have as the base was closing. But now their model is seen as a success and is seen as an example for what a lot of other jurisdictions could do. So one of the things that I want to say came out of the BRAC, they created essentially a public benefit transfer program. So local officials could transfer land on the base for free or for a reduced cost if the property was going to have some benefit for a specific need in the community. And so that redevelopment authority that they created did have the final say. But some groups also had, they were able to use some political pressure to get their way, and be able to give a reason for why they should have a free or discounted transfer. But eventually, the sites that took advantage of that public benefit transfer program was a technical college, Horry Georgetown. They also had a city recreation center that was built. American Red Cross also had headquarters there, and then they also built a private Christian school. And then in terms of the mixed use development, they also created what's called the Market Commons. And then also during this time, or it might have been before the base closed, Myrtle Beach was designated as a metropolitan statistical area, or a census designated place. One of those, which is seen as a place where um, development is soon to come. So a lot of people see that as, oh, when places are getting that census designation, this is an up and coming area that, isn't a full blown city yet in terms of the view of the census or how we, distribute population. So that was also happening in the background too. And I don't know beyond what I'm describing. I don't know too much about the history of Myrtle Beach, but it seems like this was a significant part of how we think about Myrtle Beach today, being a destination, being a place where people, go to retire or vacation, all of those things. These developments played a role in that in the last, 20, 30 years. Um, and so the Market Common, it opened in 2008. There's over 400 square feet of retail. I think there's about 48 different sites and retail shops. It opened with office space and also 195 residential units. And so it was $160 million. And this was maybe as of 10 years ago. And so there's still been continuous development that's happening in that area. And uh, Overall, it's seen as a win. The community is pleased with it, pleased with the addition of what they've been able to do. And so they have done a lot of single family housing in the development, but as of 2017, they're saying that more apartments are also being planned as well.
A question for you. Did they redevelop the entire 4,000 acres? Like, is it completely built out, or are there still parcels that are being for sale and stuff like that?
I'm not sure if there's still parcels available, but I know, one part was that, went to those specific sites like the Technical College and Red Cross headquarters. And then the other part is this mixed use development. But yeah, I'm not sure if there's more that's being built. And even with the Market Commons, that mixed use development, they did a TIF, a tax increment financing. I think I'm actually not sure if there's a specific, I think that might be what it's called in South Carolina. Different states, have different names for them, but essentially using a geographic focused area as an economic development tool to subsidize that redevelopment. So redirecting what would be the increases in property taxes from this development, and then using that to pay off their bonds. And so sometimes those are controversial, especially in communities, because those are resources that could be going back into the resources for the town. And so when projects like this that get to take advantage of public infrastructure, public resources, it becomes really critical on how much the public actually gets to benefit from it, because it's like, well, my tax dollars are going to, pay this off, when it could be used to improve schools, it could be used to improve fire and emergency services, and the list goes on.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up because the city of Atlanta also has a TIF. They call it a TAD, but it's the same. It's still a tax increment financing. In Fort McPherson, the entirety of the site isn't a TIF, and that's one of the major criticisms of the deal and of Tyler Perry Studios. Is like we have a TIF here, and it's a third of it is going to Tyler Perry. So like that's a significant amount, and so that's a major criticism of it in Atlanta also. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, it's like someone has some explaining to do, because it's very clear. And also, what people say about TIFs and these, financing programs is that, are they intentionally meant to be confusing the to residents? Like, okay, I learned about that in redevelopment, urban redevelopment and planning school. So even now I had to like refresh. I don't work in redevelopment, so I had to like refresh my memory. Okay, how does this work? So I'm imagining someone who's never heard of that type of financing before, they may scribble, scratch a quick definition. And I don't know if all places have to like vote on the allowance of TIFs or what's used. I think some may roll it out in like an initiative, something that's voted on. I I think it varies in jurisdictions, but yeah, it's not always easy to understand. So the other example is one site that is still in progress. And so that is Netflix in Fort Monmouth. And so Fort Monmouth closed in 2011, and all of the folks who were at that site were relocated to an Army base in Maryland. And apparently, Fort Monmouth is known for the development of FM radio. Is that where FM stands? Is that what FM stands for?
Girl, I don't know.
I was so fascinated by that. Jersey, they make it and we just take it, right?
I mean, Bell Technologies, Bell Industries is in Asbury, or it's in Neptune, which is like right there, but that's like the phone company. That's like what I think that's what Verizon ended up becoming. So maybe phone radio. I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't know if FM stands for Fort Monmouth.
Right, frequency monitoring. We got to look that up and see. um and yeah, so that was established. Fort Monmouth was established in 1917 under the name Camp Little Silver. And so thinking about the Netflix deal, so Netflix is set to pay 55 million for the parcel, and that their economic, you know, redevelopment authority there is called the Fort Monmouth Economic Revitalization Authority. And so they also are going to pay 5 million to that authority for utilities, and then also an office relocation fee per their terms. And so what's included in the plan right now is residential, administrative, warehouses, workshops, and then also the 12 sound stages that'll be over 500,000 square feet in total. And so with all of this, there's an estimated value from the construction, and then also like this, thinking about the jobs, and then also the production of what will come from the studio at 3.8 to 4.8 billion dollars. And as of this month, there's still quite a way for them to go before they get to construction. So they still need local planning approvals from Oceanport and Eatontown. And then there's still a lot of concerns from the residents in terms of traffic, noise, building height, all of the things that could, some could say as NIMBYism, but also very valid reasons, environmental impacts, specifically to the wetlands in that area. Asbury Park is located on the shore, right? Yeah, it's in that. I was like, me and Jasmine are like have the Jersey geography in our mind, but for those who do not, this is a site that will essentially be close to the water. Lighting and construction concerns as well. So not quite in progress yet, but already seeing the difference in, okay, there's a benefit from this estimated value, but then there's also a lot of concerns that need to be addressed before it can start being built.
What's interesting about the Fort Monmouth example that you bring up is that it was closed at the same time that Fort McPherson was closed. They were closed in the same base realignment and closures action. So it's interesting just in terms of timeline that Tyler Perry Studios is up running 2019, we in there, and we're still seeing the activity of plans for Fort Monmouth and like what's going to be there. And so it begs the question of like, if Tyler Perry didn't step in, would McPherson have any development on it? Would it be a vacant site as Fort Monmouth is? And I have family that lives in this part of New Jersey, and a major concern that they've brought up is like different than Fort McPherson, which had a few kind of like barracks and things. At Fort Monmouth had like a lot of barracks, and it's my understanding that a lot of them were just left to deteriorate. And so now when you go in with plans for housing and all of this stuff, you could have reused some of those buildings and done like an adaptive reuse situation where now they're going to need to be preserved because they're historic and they're military, but like they can't be functionable housing, which would have been a really cool like apartment or townhouse to kind of like live in. And so that's kind of a bummer that the physical infrastructure that might have been usable aren't going to have the opportunity to be used at this site.
Yeah, that's a great point because it almost makes you think like, okay, why can't everybody just get together and agree that housing can be there and then start building the housing? Maybe that's, idealist, but I believe the former Walter Reed site in DC, they were able to redevelop existing, housing that was there before, and not have to, do new construction for that site as well.
A thing that's interesting is media and these military bases, Netflix, Tyler Perry Studios. Hollywood is no longer California, in Hollywood, California. And so it's interesting. And there's been a lot of stuff done in real estate development and real estate finance around film becoming a real asset class, right? So it used to be that it was just a part of kind of industrial, like they aware a sound stage is essentially just a big warehouse building, a big industrial, it's just a square. And you just design it on the inside with a living room or a bedroom, or you make it look like a White House or whatever. Um, and so developers didn't really pay any attention to it, right? If you were a studio like Tyler Perry, like Warner Brothers, you would build your own studio. But now we're seeing that it's a real asset class in which developers can do kind of like spec media sites. So they just build a sound stage and then hire a property manager to kind of like lease it out to different studios or different producers or tech or kind of creatives. And so it's interesting to see the film industry grow and mature and move out of Hollywood. And both New Jersey and the state of Georgia have a film tax kind of credit program. And so it's worth mentioning that it seems like as more states get access to those film tax credits, where if you come and you shoot a movie, you shoot a TV show, you can receive a tax benefit. How that's popping up studios in Georgia and in New Jersey. And then not to mention just like Netflix growing from just the media we watch movies, TV on television, where Netflix used to kind of just like put out other people's content, but now they're making originals. And so yeah, they need to have a studio. So it's interesting that they're kind of taking advantage of both the tax credit program in New Jersey, but also the availability for multiple acres. Again, whenever land becomes available in urban areas, everybody's on top of it, and Netflix is no different.
Yeah, Netflix definitely. It almost feels like it happened like right in front of our eyes that they became the producers. And I think if thinking about the Tyler Perry documentary that came out on Amazon earlier this year, maybe late last year, um, I think he definitely highlights how he really did pave the way in a lot of ways in the entertainment industry, as having a lot of ownership over his projects and funding, starting out funding a lot of his own projects. And I think introducing creative solutions for how that's done. And in 2008, Georgia updated their Entertainment Industry and Investment Act to provide that 20% tax credit to filmmakers who spend at least 500,000 on products within a year, and then that additional 10%, and there's an additional 10% if they include the Georgia promotional logo, which I never knew, because I feel like I can say like a lot of Tyler Perry movies, but then also I know a lot of other TV shows. I think even Atlanta might have that little Georgia logo, when you're at the end of the show, the TV show Atlanta, um, will have that logo at the end. And so in doing research, Tyler Perry's show House of Pain got the first TV related tax credit. And I don't know if this is the first TV related tax credit in ever or in Georgia. So that show started in 2006. I think it originally was part of TBS. But in Tyler Perry reflecting on that, he attributed that to who the governor was at the time, the current governor, and all the politicians that opened up that door for Atlanta to become, a new hub for entertainment.
Yeah, they also shoot not in Atlanta, but they shoot Walking Dead in Georgia. And at the end of Walking Dead, they have the little Georgia peach. And Tyler Perry Studios was where they filmed the latest rendition of The Color Purple. And if you see the end of The Color Purple, they have the Georgia peach at the end of it. And yeah, I mean, Georgia is taking, there's articles about how much of Hollywood is moving into Atlanta and whether or not it's sustainable. Like if they don't have this tax credit, will people still want to produce content there? But it's worth acknowledging that the tax credit is definitely driving business away from Hollywood proper into other markets. So you want to spend some time talking about benefits and drawbacks of Tyler Perry Studios at Fort McPherson?
Yeah. So, um, unashamed, I went to Reddit. I wanted to hear what the people were saying. I wanted to, for not being in Atlanta, not spending a lot of time in Atlanta, I wanted to really see what the criticisms were, unfiltered in the comments section. And so a lot of the general feedback was, one, how he got the land at a rate that was significantly undervalued for how prime the real estate location was, and that there was limited public value. As of now, I think in some of the expansion plans, there are elements like movie theaters or things that people can take advantage of. But as it stands now, and as it stood for the last 5 years, why can the public not even access that? Even I think about like privately owned public spaces. I think about Amazon's headquarters in Seattle and South Lake Union. And they have, even they have concepts of like privately owned public space. You can access the space, you can, take advantage of the amenity that becomes trees and a place to sit outside. But it's still, Amazon's property. So even not even having that element of like, okay, it's private, but you can still come and go. Um, and then residents also found the deal to be significantly political, as I just mentioned, for Tyler Perry to even say, well, yeah, this was possible with the governor, or this was possible with, so and so. And so it's like, did he just have those relationships with the politicians and he was in their ear and had the pull and had the resources and the dollar signs that made the whole thing look attractive? Even as we were talking about earlier, the speed at which this happened compared to the slow progress of, other sites, even looking at the Myrtle Beach, they closed in 1993. They didn't open anything up until 2008. It's like almost 15 years later. And then Fort McPherson closed in 2011, right? Yeah, and so to have something up by the end of the decade that's definitely something to be said about what influence was there. And I think the other element too is people in the community, and as you will, if you watch the Amazon documentary, he knows he's loved to be hated. He knows people love to hate him. People love to find the reason. And I can't really relate other than living in DC, and I may not always like the person who's in the White House and how that can influence an area. So I can imagine if someone's in an area and they really, really don't support what content he produces and the impact that it has, the content, like what the content does. And I don't think we can ignore the influence of media. To have that be in your own backyard and not be able to get any benefit of it, I think just leaves a sour taste for a lot of people.
Those are great controversy. And Reddit is going public, or they might have already gone public. So I'm not a financial advisor, but if see what the stock price is looking like, FYI. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely political and it's very Georgia, right? Like it's Georgia, best place to do business, all those different things. And so when you see things get done in deals, it's like that's what they do in Georgia. They gonna structure a deal and put that together. My comments on this are the site, so they did a land use analysis, one of the many plans that were done, one of the 8 that were done between 2005 and 2011, showed that 30% of the land in the study area, so the study area was like Fort McPherson and the surrounding community, was institutional, which meant it was all like Fort McPherson, right? 30% of the area, the community is 30% Fort McPherson. And I think that kind of drawback of we never had access to that land for hundreds of years while it was a military base, and now we still do not have access to it as it's a private studio, is a controversy worth having because it's a huge amount. So Tyler Perry has 330 acres, and 220 of them are open green space that he uses for different sets and stuff like that. So the community is in this urban area, while Atlanta is not New York City, it's not Manhattan, it's not concrete jungle. There are trees and things around. Everybody can benefit from being in a 200-acre park. Like, that's a great thing to have access to, but they don't. And so the community never had access to 30% of their land, and they still don't have access to 30% of their land. And that is a controversy worth talking about.
Yeah, and especially the history, because it's not that far removed of at the time when, there people in the area, I'm assuming, may have relatives that, served in the armed forces, um, right around that time where they still were not treated as equal citizens. And so even just from from like the spatial aspect of it, of still feeling closed off by having access to that, and knowing the history, because it's not that far removed from current generations, is like, mm.
Yeah. Um, we'll talk about some benefits. I was charged with finding some benefits, which were not that easy to find, but I got some. So, a major benefit of just about every redevelopment plan you will read is economic development. We're doing this because it's going to develop the economy of the community. That is the goal. And so that can be done in terms of jobs. It can be done in terms of real estate value. It can be done in terms of neighborhood quality. And so jobs, some reports estimate between 400 to 1,000 permanent jobs. Now, granted, think about film or TV. A lot of those jobs are temporary. While we're recording, you are our camera crew. While we're recording, you are our sets person. Once we start recording, y'all are on contract, we done recording, goodbye. And so the permanent jobs is what's really important here. Real estate development, they need supporting housing for cast and crew that are going to be on these sites. Grocery and retail stores kind of surrounding the community. Office buildings for supporting industries like real estate attorneys or agents or sound tech people or set designers. They all have offices that could be located in close proximity to his studio. Just the general increased home value, which you've heard our previous episodes around um, home valuation, and understanding how home value translates to wealth, but increased home value is something that comes from living in close proximity to a studio. And so the research from the Journal of Urban Studies found that living within 1 mile of a major studio, so Tyler Perry, Warner Brothers, Paramount, increases your home value by about 4% on average. And so if you can realize that home value through a home equity loan or a refinance, then that gives you buying power to send your kid to college or purchase a second home or something like that. And then in Atlanta, you have this kind of like really interesting dynamic of economic development happening around Fort McPherson because the military base is 8 miles from the Atlanta airport and 8 miles from downtown Atlanta. It's also 2 miles from a trailhead for the Atlanta Beltline. And so you have a lot of influences happening at this neighborhood. And so TBD on what the combined and compounded impact will be on the community.
Yeah, and in terms of the uh permanent jobs, also on Reddit, folks argued that Tyler Perry Studios did create better jobs compared to the Battery, which is another mixed use development site in Atlanta. So they opened in 2017, so like 2 years earlier than Tyler Perry Studios, and that cost 400 million to develop. So I think that is another benefit, that comparatively to other things that claim to bring jobs to the area, that there may be more permanency in the jobs that Tyler Perry created with his studios.
The battery for those is the redevelopment around the baseball team for the state of Georgia. Don't ask me the name. I don't know. I don't watch baseball. There were some environmental benefits. So the military is not the best steward of land. I'll just leave it at that. At that. They have ammunition, they got powder, they got also people live there, so there's homes and stuff like that. And so as a condition of the sale from the military to the state of Georgia to Tyler Perry, that little three-part sale, Tyler Perry was required by the U.S. Army to complete an environmental analysis of water and ground soil on the site and remediate any negative environmental conditions. So that BRAC report from the Department of Defense acknowledges that there was at least some water contamination on the site. And so Tyler Perry was required to clean that up to move forward. So there's environmental benefits. And then, like I mentioned, although the space is not accessible to the public, there are 220 acres of open green space that Tyler Perry is preserving for him to shoot different outdoor scenes, but it's still providing those same carbon and CO2 kind of protectants that it would if it was accessible. So it's like a 200-acre kind of, I'm not going to call it a forest because it's not forested, but like it's a 200 acres of open space that's still working actively to combat pollution and climate change around the city of Atlanta.
Yeah, and even if it's not accessible now, I think it's, positive thinking to think it maybe at one point it could be. Even for, I think I went on his website. I think you can like make reservations. I don't even want to know how much it costs, but like people can reserve it for different things, I think, parts of the studio. I think so, it could be more open at a later time. So
And this benefit, and we'll talk next about what's happening on those remaining kind of 150 acres at Fort McPherson. But this benefit for me, Nima, I'm curious on your take on this. It's really not maybe it's a public benefit. It depends how you look at it. I think it's worth saying that the irony is not lost on me that Fort McPherson was originally a military base by the Confederate Army in the United States Civil War, and is now owned by a Black man who produces content directed at Black people and Black families, and who owns the studio outright by himself. To me, that means a lot. It said to me, that's a lot of progress for America, and I think it's important because not for nothing, Hollywood is not the nicest to Black people. We hear stories in the news all the time about the pay disparity between white actors and Black actors, and Black actors not getting access to the same roles. And so I think about Tyler Perry and Spike Lee and Ryan Coogler and Ava DuVernay and Issa Rae and the handful of kind of like Black directors and producers who have their own studios that they're working on. Meaning they don't have a physical. Tyler Perry's the first one to have his own physical studio, this large space. And I think about what type of discrimination or kind of doors were closed to him, and how yes, the site could have been done with a more community focus, and they could have done more to address the planning concerns of the neighborhood. But I'm still really, really happy that it's Tyler Perry and not Paramount or Netflix or one. Like, it's something to be said about it being a Black man in Hollywood. And I think he's mentioned it before, like he's creating his own Hollywood in a space, Atlanta, that's been more accessible and friendly to Black wealth and Black upper middle classness, if that's a word.
yeah, no, I definitely hear that. And I feel like watching I feel like both of us have the little cough today, but I feel like watching the documentary, what I walked away from was like, I don't know how to describe it, but the impact of working hard, like he worked for what he has gotten to. And I think, um, I think that's a positive example in of itself too, for the people coming behind him to see, okay, this person paved the way, opened doors, was the first for a lot of things. Regardless of whether you agree with the content, you can still see that that paved the way and created access for, you know, other people. Because when people weren't hiring Black actors, Tyler Perry was. Some actors, when I still see them, I'm like, oh, I remember them in a Tyler Perry movie. Like that's where they got their start. And so I think that in and of itself, and to be able to continue to do that on a large scale is still positive.
Yeah, Shamar Moore and Embrace. I'm all
I couldn't think of his name. I saw him on the bus in my mind. I could not think of his name in that moment, but you got it. You read my mind.
It's so funny because he will always remember for that role. And it's like he done so much of that. But Embrace was like, okay now.
And Blair Underwood will always be a villain.
And so the last kind of benefit I want to talk about is the city of Atlanta and the state of Georgia did not lose in this deal. They were able to get 150 acres of land. Tyler Perry, the site was 500 or so acres. Tyler Perry has about 400, 330 of them. And so they have all this land. And so recently it's transferred hands. There's a ground lease between the city of Atlanta and TD Jakes Joint Ventures. TD Jakes, yes, that TD Jakes, Pastor TD Jakes out of Texas, megachurch pastor, um, has a ground lease for 95 of those acres to do redevelopment. And so I found his redevelopment plan and it's in our show notes. But basically, his 95 acres runs along Campbellton Road and Lee Street. So he had the if you think of it as a just think of it as a rectangle, for example, he has the outer border of the rectangle and Tyler Perry Studios is on the inside, if that makes sense. And so his plan includes leaving the VA hospital, allowing that to own and to operate, affordable supportive housing for veterans, supportive entertainment buildings, those agents, sound tech people type of office buildings, a grocery store, a hotel, apartments, townhomes, single family homes, open space, bike lanes, affordable housing. His plans to build in a street grid. His plan is over a 10-year period and has 5 phases. So we will see what happens. But there is, I saw this as an opportunity, and maybe it's not a benefit, but it's an opportunity of the sale of Fort McPherson, is that the city of residents of Atlanta had multiple plans for what they wanted to see at Fort McPherson, all of which were around this theme of new urbanism and mixed use and mixed density housing and office and retail. They all wanted to see that connectivity to the existing neighborhood. And while they didn't get it on all 485 acres, at least the city of Atlanta was able to get a third of that land to attempt to work on it. So he has these 95 acres, TD Jakes. We'll see what happens, how many other kind of partners come into the transaction, but at least we have the opportunity to realize some new urbanism and some neighborhood connectivity other than just transferring land from one walled industrial one walled institutional use to another walled institutional use. And so I thought it was opportunity that, if realized appropriately, can really transform this neighborhood in a way that the studio itself just simply cannot.
I think that's a perfect note to end on, and really captures the beginning, the history, and where we are today, TBD, of the future of how Tyler Perry Studios will impact the surrounding area. Um, so I think in a way it's exciting. I think it's going to be exciting to see how it turns out. I definitely found, for doing research for this episode, this is a topic that has had, from the time we started talking about this episode to like when we are recording it, it's probably like 3 months plus. And there's been updates every time we've come back to it about what's going on with some of these sites that are not yet fully developed yet. And so being able to see the connection between what seems like a really stationary thing in a place like a military base, and then seeing the rapid change that can also happen for a community. Do you have any other closing thoughts, takeaways, for this episode?
My last takeaway would just be that opportunities like this is where kind of where I started. Opportunities in cities, in urban areas to transform 555 acres are rare. And I think it's important for communities to really have a say in what happens. But I also recognize, and maybe this is, it's not like a putting a button on something, but I also recognize that money has to happen. And part of the reason why Tyler Perry had to step in is because the city of Atlanta and state of Georgia was not willing to, was not financially capable or not willing. Remember, this is 2005 to 2011. Like we had a whole recession in that time period. And so we talk about all the time, money makes the world go round. And the community plan is nice and lovely, and we all want new urbanism, but who's going to pay for it? And the DOD was not transferring this land for free to anyone. They wanted money back because they're relocating and all of that stuff. And so I'm glad that in some instances you get nothing. And at least here they got something. And that's what I'm grateful for.
That yeah, that's similar to my thought. It was like you can't get everything, but sometimes you get something. So that's where we're at today. As Jasmine said earlier, the podcast will return in the fall of 2024. So thank you all for a great season. We're not going anywhere. You can still reach us over email and our show notes, and you can find us on social media at the number 4 degrees pod. And we'll see y'all soon.
Peace out, y'all.